Imagine stepping outside your home one day only to see a dark figure approaching. As the figure gets nearer, you see that it's an old woman dressed in a black cloak with a red skirt, and she's carrying something in her hand. Closer inspection reveals that it's a broom that she immediately begins sweeping with as she gets closer and closer. This could only mean one thing. All will perish. Because you have just been visited by Pesta, and all hope is lost. Pesta is an ashen-faced old woman traveling across the Norwegian countryside. She's dressed in a red dress with a black cloak. While Pesta herself might not be malevolent, she carries disease with her everywhere she goes, and you can't escape her no matter what you do. Pesta usually carries a rake or a broom with her. If she's seen with a rake, that means that some people might be spared. But if she's seen with a broom that she starts sweeping with, then no one will be left alive once she leaves. The disease that she brought with her would spread at such a rapid speed that people wouldn't have time to do anything, not even freeing their livestock from their stables and sheds. This meant that Pesta would claim even the animals, as they would soon succumb to hunger and thirst. When she was done, an entire community would be wiped out. Pesta would then move on, heading to her next destination, and the community that used to be full of life would be left to be reclaimed by nature. One story involving Pesta says that she came to a lake and called out for a boatman to take her across. She was wearing a blue skirt and carrying a book, so the boatman didn't recognize her at first. Eventually, he realized just who he was picking up, and he immediately began pleading for his life. If she spared him, he would happily take her across the lake free of charge. She looked in the book that she was carrying and then answered quietly that she couldn't spare his life. All she could do was make his death an easy one. After taking Pesta across the lake, the boatman went home, feeling more tired than he ever had before. He stumbled to his bed, fell asleep, and never woke up. In the region of Sogn in western Norway, you will find the Valley of Jostedal, which was hit badly by the Black Plague. As the plague grew nearer and nearer, many of the rich and powerful fled the valley, seeking shelter elsewhere. They allowed no entry to their new shelter, and in order to communicate with the rest of the valley, letters would be left under a rock at the entrance of the valley. But despite their efforts, Pesta could not be kept out. Only one young girl survived. Eventually, people from the neighboring valley came to investigate. They searched each house but found no one alive. When they were getting ready to return home, they spotted the young girl. But because she's had to survive by herself in the valley for a long time, she was like a wild animal and she ran off into the forest. The search party all agreed that it was their duty to rescue the girl. It took a long time for them to track her down. Once she was found, she was given the name Rupa, meaning grouse, because she reminded her rescuers of one. After that, the Valley of Jostedal was abandoned. But after many, many years, new people rediscovered the valley and they began settling there, mending the old farmhouses and overgrown fields. The young girl had grown into a young adult. She returned to her childhood valley, found love and married. She then stayed in the valley for the rest of her life. Many years after the Black Death, in a different part of Norway, a bear hunter was out hunting in the forest when he completely lost his way. He wandered aimlessly through the woods, looking for any sign of another human. It eventually grew dark, and he had almost given up hope of finding shelter for the night. But then he suddenly saw several old buildings that were hidden among the trees. The small settlement seemed to be abandoned, and the hunter reluctantly crept closer. When he arrived, he slowly entered the main cottage, calling out in case someone was there. But all he found was a rusty pot by the fireplace, some rotting yarn on the benches, and finally, in one of the beds, he found old human bones. All of which told him that a long time ago, Pesta had shown up, sweeping with her broom, and the entire settlement was no more. After investigating some of the other cottages, the hunter decided that this would be his new home. He buried all of the bones and began mending the land and the houses. These stories were taken from the book Norske Folkesang by Andreas Fey from 1833. This book is a collection of Norwegian legends and folktales that have been handed down from generation to generation. What could have been the inspiration for a being such as Pesta, who struck fear in everyone who knew of her? The Black Plague, also known as the Black Death or the bubonic plague, was the deadliest pandemic recorded in human history, with the number of deaths being estimated up to 75 to 200 million. It spread across Europe in the years 1346 to 1353 and is believed to have originated in Asia several decades earlier. In 1349, a boat from England washed up on the Norwegian shores. Everyone on board the boat had perished from the illness, making rats and fleas the only ones to disembark and carry the bubonic plague into Norway. In a matter of months, an estimated 60% of the population had succumbed to the plague. The other Scandinavian countries soon followed, with approximately 1/3 of Denmark's population succumbing to the illness. While plague doctors and scientists worked to better understand the plague in order to be able to better treat it, people living in villages and in rural areas had to make sense of it somehow. The result ended up being an old woman traveling across the countryside, spreading disease wherever she went. Which meant that instead of the plague being an untouchable illness that you couldn't see, you had a real, tangible threat in Pesta. Pesta's story also had a lot of scientific awareness to it. Her name, Pesta, hints at her nature, as the word pest means plague in Norwegian. The name for the bacteria responsible for the bubonic plague was called Yersinia pestis. Supposedly, the path that Pesta traveled across the countryside matched the path the Black Death took across Norway. She traveled from farm to farm by walking across the countryside and/or traveling by boat. This meant that the boatmen were both victims and carriers. They did succumb to the illness themselves, but they also helped Pesta get where she needed to go, thus aiding her in spreading the disease further. As mentioned before, it is believed that the plague arrived in Norway by a boat washing up on shore, with the only survivors being rats and fleas. One of the more common means of transmission of the bubonic plague was by boat, so having Pesta using boats as one way of traveling became a way of explaining the spread of the disease. The Black Death only lasted a few months in Norway, but it left a scar that took generations to heal. and one of the ways that was used to make sense of it all was creating a villain. Pesta came about during a time where people wanted someone to blame, someone to be angry at, someone to fear. In an attempt to explain the horrible events that occurred, Pesta became the embodiment of the Black Death.